Hello everyone, welcome to the Raise.Dev Hacktoberfest Help Desk. I'm your host for this show. My name is Joe, and this is our first of 3 shows today. For those of you who are new to the Hacktoberfest Help Desk, we are a resource for you this Hacktoberfest to help you land all the pull requests that you're hoping to land. We are here to give you tips and advice around approaching open source and making your start, as well as hopefully showing you some really cool projects and other areas of technology that you can get involved with this Hacktoberfest. As I said, we've got 3 shows today. They're all with very special guests. I'll bring on our guest for this show very, very shortly. But before that, a couple of things to note. I can already see there's folks in chat. Hey, folks, thanks for joining us. You're very welcome to post in chat and ask questions anytime as we go along, whether they're related to what we're speaking about or not. We will do our best to answer them before the end of the show. You are also welcome to post links in chat. If you've got projects you want to share or stuff like that, very welcome to post links. But please heed my warning. We have a very finely tuned moderation bot because the internet is a terrible place. So if you want to post a link, that's totally fine. Just give me a heads up at Raise Devs in chat. Let me know, and I'll add you to the allow list so that our moderation bot does not put you in a timeout, because our moderation bot loves to put people in timeouts, and someone demonstrates that functionality for us at least once a show. So please let us know before you post a link so you don't accidentally get blocked. Yes, exactly, Sudip. Poor Matt from DigitalOcean manages to get himself put in a timeout every single show. So that's that note. The second note, as I said, we are here to help you this Hacktoberfest, and we can do that via answering your questions in chat, but also you can submit your questions in advance to Raise.Dev Hacktoberfest, where we get them in front of our lovely guests who will review them and then answer them here live on the show for you. We send you an email about which show you'll get your question will be answered on, and then we send you the recording after the fact as well. So if you do have any question, thank you, Luke, for demonstrating exactly how to get banned. We will email you the recording of your question after the show as well, so you can ask questions at Raise.Dev Hacktoberfest. And then this is our last day of shows this week. We don't do shows over the weekend, but you can find our schedule at twitch.tv RaiseDev's schedule. That's updated every week, so I will be updating it over the weekend for our shows next week. But stick around at the end, and I'll give you a preview of what's to come next week and who we've got coming on the show, and also talk a little bit about our shows for the rest of the day as well, because we have 2 more shows after this one. And then all that's left from me before I bring on our guest, Raise.Dev, we're here to help you level up your developer career, whether you're getting your first job, doing a career change, trying to move from mid-level to senior, whatever it is. We help you get the experience you need to make that jump with the help of our amazing coaches. You can sign up for a coaching session at Raise.Dev today. We are completely free whilst you're in early access, and we'll get you matched with a coach and get you on the way to where you want to be in your developer career. So you can find out more at Raise.Dev. Whew, okay, that's everything from me. Please welcome Mr. PJ Hagerty to the stream. Welcome, PJ. How you doing?
Hey, everybody. Joe, that was a super impressive intro.
Thank you.
You managed to get through it without taking a breath. I a little afraid you're going to pass out.
Like show 24, I think. So at this point, it just rolls off the tongue.
Nice, perfect.
Yeah. For the folks in the chat who aren't familiar with you and your work, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is PJ Hagerty. I'm a senior developer advocate at Mattermost at the moment. If you know who I am, chances are you've either been annoyed by me on Twitter or my many opinions on many different things, or you've seen me because I like to travel the world and speak at conferences, which used to be a thing in the before times. I've been to conferences on 5 different continents. I've been to 28 different countries, 37 states in the US. I've actually been to every major country in North America, which is pretty interesting. So I'm just like knocking things off the list.
Yeah.
But I love to travel and talk about programming, talk about the way people interact, the way they kind of function, and how to make, you mentioned the internet's a horrible place, but how do we make it a better place for everybody? Sure. Because it's kind of what we've got. Yeah. And that's what I do. I write code and then I talk about it.
Wonderful. Perfect. Great. Which is exactly what we're going to do here today. So we've got a couple of things to get through. We've already got questions about working at Mattermost. One of our folks in the chat has got 4 PRs merged in the Mattermost, which is pretty cool.
Nice.
So I guess to give an overview of what we're going to do, we're going to chat a little bit about PJ and your career and things you care about and what you've been working on. And then towards the end of the show, we're going to move into talking about a particular project that you're interested in, open sourcing mental illness. So I guess to kick off, so I'm aware of your work mostly for the DevRel sphere, and I guess that's where a lot of your travel has come from. As you said, you're a developer advocate at Mattermost. What was your how did you get into that work? Like, where did that start for you?
It's a circuitous thing, it's kind of funny. I was this is going to sound like a very strange story, Joe, but I'm just going to go with it.
Strange stories are perfect. Yeah.
If anyone would like to make a documentary, I'm available. But I started playing musical instruments when I was about
Mhm.
7 or 8 years old, and really getting into playing the drums when I was 13. A lot of what goes on with being a musician lends itself to being a computer programmer, and mathematics. So I went to a high school for kids that were really good at math and science, and in doing so, I started programming. Probably about 14 or 15 years old, I learned Turbo Pascal 5.5, which I know shows exactly how old I am. We had a really cool program where we were allowed to bring laptops home. They weighed about 50 pounds.
Wow.
And it came with a power block the size of a lunchbox. They were just huge things. But I, of course, wanted to be a rock star, because who doesn't? So I kind of stopped programming and said, this HTML and CSS thing is great. I love being on bulletin boards all the time, but I want to play the drums. That's what I want to do. So I kind of did that for a while, came back, had a few jobs, moved around a little bit. The band broke up. It didn't seem to be working out. I, started living with my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife. And we were going to have a baby. So we decided we would move back to Buffalo, which is where I'm from, Buffalo, New York. She's also from here. So we're going to be close to family. I was like, well, then I'm going to go back to school, and I'm going to go for computer programming. And so I did. I, basically walked on. I was like, hey, I'm older than every student here, but I'm going to learn, and, started learning, your basics of your C++ and your ASPs and things like that, because that's what you learn at university. You learn these Microsoft languages, and that's how it goes. And I got out and I got my first job doing Visual Fox Pro, which some of you are probably too young to remember. It's a horrible language. About 2 years into that first real programming job, I'd done some consulting gigs and, building some PHP websites for people and things like that. And anyone who's ever seen me code knows that I am not a front-end designer. I can develop a functional website, a functional web application. It will work, and it will be in Times New Roman, black text on a white background, because that's how I do things.
Nice.
But I realized, we were working in Fox Pro, and Microsoft came and said, we're not going to do that anymore. We're like, what do you mean you're not going to do it? They're like, just end of life the whole thing. So my lead developer, he panicked. He was like, well, I've done this my whole professional career. What do we do? He started looking into other database options, and he found Postgres. It was very similar to the way that Fox Pro worked. So what works well with Postgres? Well, Ruby on Rails. And he came to me and he said, can you learn Ruby on Rails in a weekend? And I said, no, that's ridiculous. I've got hockey practice. My daughter has dance class. I'm not doing that. But, buy me the pickaxe book, and I'll come in on Monday and I'll start working on it. So, wow, Pog. I have not.
Yeah, Postgres is Pog. I was smiling. I was like, that's the most
phrase that I'm learning. Yeah,
that's the most Twitch comment we've had on the stream chat, I think.
But yeah, I feel so hip. People are Postgres is Pog. I'm like, yeah.
Also, I don't know if they're still here, but I've just noticed Sushi Day is in the chat. Hi, Sushi Day. Sushi Day runs a wonderful site called belly.io, which is bringing the cooking streamers together, but they also do the programming streamers. It's a really cool site.
That's another area where there's a lot of interesting crossover.
Cooking and programming. Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, so I learned Ruby, and I taught the new Ruby developers. We went to the local Ruby meetup here in Buffalo. Which contained 5 people, one of who was Wayne Seguin, who created RVM. He hadn't at the time, but he was like doing the Ruby meetup. And another guy was this guy, Kevin Baird, who had written Ruby by example. And we went and said, hey, we're looking to get into Ruby. Do y'all know how to teach us that? And they're like, yeah, we'd be happy to. And we're like, cool, we're just going to hire all of you. Nice. So they taught me and a few other developers how to do Ruby. I taught them the domain knowledge of what we're doing. We're building academic software, which is exactly as exciting as it sounds. Lots of beige things, lots of surveys, cool problems to solve. But when you put it out in the world, like, it didn't look very, it wasn't like a hip, Silicon Valley style website. It was just a basic website. But really cool. We had a lot of fun doing it. Around that time, I started going to conferences, and I really liked.
What was your first conference? With people.
My first conference ever, in the open source world, the one that I remember most is one that was called Voices That Matter. It was I don't know if it was Pearson or O'Reilly or who it was, but it is affectionately known in the Ruby community as ObiConf, because it was basically Obi Fernandez had written the Rails way. And they wanted a conference to kind of celebrate that. So they brought in a bunch of people. And the only conference I had been before that was a Microsoft conference. So I showed up wearing khaki pants and a blue button down shirt, as you're supposed to.
Nice. Yeah.
And I walked in and they had told me to meet this woman, Marianne. And I was like, hey, I'm PJ. You know, my Ruby group sent me here. We had a free ticket. And she's like, oh, yeah. They told me you're coming. Awesome. Have a seat with these people. And I ended up sitting with Sandy Metz, Tamer Saleh, and Brian Lyles.
That's awesome.
And I don't know who any of them are because I've been doing Ruby for like 2 weeks. Right. And Brian just leaned over to me and he's like, hey, you don't look like super comfortable right now. And I was like, I don't feel comfortable because everyone else is wearing jeans and t-shirts. He's like, how far is your hotel? I'm like, around the corner. We were in Boston. Yeah. And he was like, tell you what, he goes, these breakfasts go on for like an hour. Like nobody's going to do anything for an hour. Yeah. Run back to your hotel, go put on a pair of jeans and relax. Grab. I remember he specifically said, grab a t-shirt off that pivotal table, go get a pair of jeans and come back and we'll, I'll save your spot. And literally Brian and I have been friends since that moment. I did not know he was the test all the effing time guy at that time. I did not know Sandy was going to write, the biggest book the Ruby community had ever done.
Yeah, and which I just threw in the chat, by the way. I got very excited about that and had to throw that in. This book, 99 Bottles of Oop, is fantastic.
Yes.
Co-authored with Katrina Owens, so I worked with the GitHub for a little bit. Really fantastic book.
She is one of the most amazing people I've ever met in coding and so humble. Can you hear me?
Sorry. Yeah, I can now. Sorry, it's my headphones.
That's okay. But yeah, so I loved being part of the Ruby community. And so I would try to take any opportunity I could to go to any Ruby event. And that's kind of where I met the Engine Yard folks. And I really liked a lot of the people who were working there. Mm-hmm. So about a year later, well, a couple of years after that first event, I'm a Ruby developer. I actually know what's going on when I go to these conferences for a change. Yeah. I end up getting in this contest, which was oddly called a DevOps contest. Mm-hmm. At Engineer, and this is before people were really talking about DevOps, but it involved ping pong ball guns and shooting people. And they developed an app where you would tweet and you would get points. And a friend of mine and I won, and they handed me a brand new Apple MacBook Air, which was the brand new thing. This was 2011.
What?
It's like version 2 of the MacBook Air.
I don't understand any of what I just heard.
Yeah, I know. And like we didn't either. We thought we were going to get a cool T-shirt and bragging rights in our office. Right. And oddly enough, 6 months later, I was working at Engineer. And a fun fact, the laptop still works. It's 9 years old. It's in a bag behind me. Has some power issues, but it's still functional. Right. Why should it? Okay, so sidestepping, Sudeep. Yes. Why you should learn Ruby? It's not just about the use case. It's kind of about the methodology around it. Ruby talks about convention over configuration and making programmers happy. It's the most easily readable code. So if you really want to focus on how to make code readable, best techniques in test-driven development, things like that, Ruby is the way to go. Mm-hmm. There's no two ways about that.
Yeah. If you want to hear more about that, we do have some earlier streams. The best one to look at will be John and Chris Hunt. It's on our Twitch page where they review a 10-year-old Ruby on Rails app for the stream. It was very fun looking at this 10-year-old code and talking about how Ruby has changed. That will get a lot into Ruby and why. But sorry, PJ, you were going to say, I think you were going to say you have more advice on that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, basically Ruby, the great thing about Ruby is if you want to get into it and you have a little bit of programming knowledge or no programming knowledge at all, it's built for you. Right. If you have been programming for 50 years and you know COBOL like the back of your hand, Ruby's built for you too. Right. It's the whole idea is you want to do something, you want to make something, and it's willing to do that heavy lifting for you in a way that's easily understandable. I can show someone who's never coded before a Ruby application and they totally get it. Mm-hmm. To even put a fine point in that, in 2013. 2012, 2013, my kids got laptops for Christmas. My daughter said she wanted to see what I was doing in the basement all the time. Because my office, I've been working remote for a long time. My office is in our basement. And she was like, I want to write code. So I brought her to Kids Ruby. That was Christmas of 2012, like 2 days after Christmas, 2012. In May of 2013, she keynoted RubyConf. Mm-hmm. She was 11 years old.
That's amazing.
So it's that accessible. It's that, I mean, it doesn't mean, I think a lot of people say, well, so it's easy, so you can't do complicated things with it. That's completely incorrect. Yeah. it's one of the most amazing, most flexible languages for building web applications I've seen.
Was this 2000? You said 2013 was this talk, right?
2013, yeah. You can look up
Cool.
Katie Hagerty, My Kids
Yeah,
Ruby.
I've got it.
Journey.
I've got
Yeah.
it. There you go. It's in the
It's
chat.
and I'll tell you from the DevRel side, the most terrifying moments I've ever had on stage. When you bring an 11-year-old on stage with you who is candid and she is vivacious. I think those are good. Capricious. These are all good words to describe. And also, you have no idea what is going to come out of her mouth. No matter how often we practiced, it didn't come off the same way. Almost to the point where
she would be 18 now. How is
she's
she
18?
coding?
Yeah, she finished AP coding in her high school classes. She decided not to take coding her first semester of college, only because she didn't like pandemic stuff. She didn't like taking a coding class remotely. She didn't see the value in it. So she's also heavily involved in theater, so she wanted to focus on that. But it is part of her honors program, so she will get back to it eventually.
Cool, awesome. This is just like, I was filled with joy because looking at the thumbnail of this YouTube video and just seeing her like barely poke above the podium. The laptop is. Yeah, it's very good.
Well, that was even her earlier one where she snuck into Nickel City Ruby, which was the Ruby conference we held here in Buffalo.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll just tell the full story. It's easier to get there.
Yeah, go for it.
We got the computer. She did Kids Ruby. I'm sitting down here. She comes down after like 4, 5, 6 hours, and she says, "I'm done." And I'm like, "Oh, did you get stuck? Daddy's here to help." I said I'd help you. And she's like, "No, Dad." She turns her computer on, little certificates in the window. She's like, "I'm done."
Right.
And I'm like, "Oh, shit." So I sent a message to Ron Evans, who is the guy who's behind Kids Ruby, and he was one of my big ins in the Ruby community because he used to throw a jam session, and when I didn't know anything about Ruby, I knew I could go to a jam session. I would have some sort of knowledge that was of value to the community. I could go and play drums, play a little guitar, and stuff like that. But yeah, so I was like, "How long should Kids Ruby take?" And he's like, "Well, obviously not in one shot over a period of time, like a week or something. You do 18 to 24 hours." I was like, "Well, what if you got through it in 6 hours?" And he goes, "Who did that?" And I go, "My 10-year-old." And he's like, "Can I hire her?" And I'm like, "I'm pretty sure that's illegal." And he's like, "That's like the dream. That's so awesome." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's great." And I thought that would be it. And then, January rolls around. She has a birthday, and she's like, "I want to do the thing that you do, the other thing that you do." I'm like, "What that?" She's like, "I would like to go and speak at a conference." I'm like,
interesting. Yeah.
I'm like, "Okay, whatever." So she does a presentation at her school where she has cue cards and she talks about computer science, and she talks about how she used Ruby to learn how everything worked together. And her teachers have no idea how this works. First, they fought us. They were like, "You can't, that's not science. We want baking soda volcanoes and potatoes that power clocks." And she's like, "It literally, this is, to put a point on my daughter's attitude, who I see Flora's in the chat. Flora's met my daughter, knows exactly how she works." But yeah, she's like, "It says science right in the word computer science. It's computer science. It's science."
Right.
So they're like, "Well, all right, go ahead." And then she gave like a 10-minute presentation that they didn't know. We came to pick her up, and
we just got floor banned. Sorry, Floor.
Wow. Amazing. But yeah, you're right. That is an aggressive bot.
It is, and also Floor's a VIP, so that shouldn't have happened. I genuinely am very sorry, Floor. I'll fix that after. I might just turn off the emote filtering. Anyway, so sorry. Yeah, so you had this argument with the teacher.
Yeah. So she comes in, and we come into the school, and the principal's like, "What do you feed her? What do you give her? What are you doing different than all the other parents?" Like, we just kind of let her do her thing. It's like owning a butterfly. No one owns a butterfly. Right. And so she was like, "Well, I want to speak at a conference." So I'm like, "Listen, you can apply to speak in Nickel City Ruby, which is the link you put in there. And I'm going to give you a 0 out of 5. Right. Because I'm not going to show you preference. You're going to learn the hard, because part of this is learning failure as a developer, rejection and understanding how that works. And she's not learning any of that. So she does, and everybody's like, "Oh, this is so adorable. We need this talk." So I had to explain to everybody, I'm like, "That's my Katie. She's got 10 minutes of material. She's not going to do a full talk." And we get to the day, and we'll do her after lunch. She'll have 10 minutes before lightning talks. And Nick Quaranto and Amanda Quaranto and I are standing there looking at the podium and looking at Katie and saying to ourselves, we have a real problem here. So we're scrambling backstage at the downtown Buffalo Library and stacking up milk crates to make it safe, but so she could be seen above that podium. She just holds the microphone. It was, as a dad, one of the greatest moments ever. And then she gets up and she has her little 3x5 cards and she's doing her slideshow. She starts ad-libbing. And one of the best things that she said, so we're not a tournament. There's 200 professional Ruby developers. Yeah. And she just goes, and so I do, print screen, and it goes to the screen, and I open up my browser, and it says Hello World. But it's not Hello World. It's Hello Me, because this is localhost, and localhost means you're the only one who sees it. And 200 people just going, I've never thought about this before.
Deep insights from the mind of an 11-year-old.
Yeah. So long story short, she's like, I want to do a talk where I go on a plane.
Yeah.
So we applied for RubyConf, and I thought this was it because I had never been accepted to RubyConf at that point in time.
Right,
I was getting into the beginning of my professional DevRel career. Right. So the organizers call and they're like, would she be willing to keynote? And I'm like, are you kidding me? And I'm like, who are the other keynotes? Like Ernie Miller and Yakihiro Matsumoto, who created Ruby. And I'm like, let me ask her. I'm like, do you think you could do 45 minutes as a keynote on stage? She's like, do I get to go on a plane? I'm like, yes, we get to fly to Miami. She's like, I'm in.
I can make it work.
So I called engineer and I'm like, yo, I didn't get accepted, but Katie did. They're like, we're making a special shirt for her right now.
That's awesome.
And just did an interesting 45-minute talk that roamed all over the place. Ron Evans cried. Jim Wyrick said it was one of the best talks he'd ever seen in his life, which was super honorable. And Matt came up and thanked her to the point where when I was at RubyConf in 2018, he asked me how she was doing, jumped on a FaceTime call with her. Well, he's got 15 hardcore Ruby developers following me around. And, oh, Matt, share your knowledge. And he's like, how are you doing? How is high school? Tell me about you. And he's talking to this, this girl on the phone. And that's in a nutshell. To go back to Sudeep's question, that's what makes Ruby great. The code is good. The code is fun. It's easy to use. The community is amazing. And that's what makes the big difference. Ruby is worth the community.
Yeah.
Which goes back to my whole story.
Yeah.
I told you, Joe, you're not going to be able to get me to stop.
No, I was literally just thinking that this closes a loop on something that I've long observed, which is I've done a lot of work in education, particularly for lower ages in the UK. Mm-hmm. And when I was looking for resources getting kids in the coding, I would very frequently find Ruby books. There's a large amount of published material for getting kids into Ruby versus other programming languages. Mm-hmm. And I just connecting that loop to a lot of what you're saying about the community and their engagement in this.
There's been a lot of actually academic things written on why Ruby works. It has a lot to do with the instant feedback, the immediate ability to see what you're doing in the same way that when a lot of us learned to code and we got our first print statement of Hello World, you wanted to jump through the roof. You're like, I am an amazing hacker. I am basically, I'm ready to go take on NASA and the CIA and the NSA. I'm the most amazing person in the world. And it's like, okay, so I'm going to spend the next 7 days creating a dialer that allows me to call my girlfriend through my phone or through my computer and hope that it works out. But still, Ruby gives you that kind of initial feeling of wow, I've got a bit of power at my fingertips, and I can do something with that, and that's awesome. And that's why, even going back to before that whole story happened, I love the Ruby community. So in 2011, I joined Engine Yard as a support engineer because I was a Rubyist who knew how to deploy an application. And most of their support organization folks were, you'd call them DevOps or SREs now, but they were systems administrators. They knew a lot about, grep and how to sift through logs and things like that. But they didn't know what bundler was, because it wasn't that kind of company, which is fine.
Yeah, for sure.
But shortly after that, I was at a conference in Pittsburgh. It was the first Steel City Ruby conference. Whenever I was able to drive to a conference and Jim Wyrick was able to drive to a conference, we would bring our guitars and skip lunch. Because Jim, for those who don't know Jim Wyrick, he's the guy who created Rake, probably one of the biggest influences on my career, hands down. Just super nice guy. We talked about that hello world feeling a few minutes ago. He was hello world about absolutely everything. 70-year-old guy would get on stage and he would be hello world about, he bought an AR paradrone and he made it fly with code.
Yeah.
Like he was just.
Do you remember the time when just everyone was bringing those AR parrot drones to every conference, and like there was at least one demo per conference where you risked getting a drone in the face?
I thought it was kind of like how now like every conference has to have a talk about Kubernetes. It's required,
right?
If you don't have if someone doesn't say Kubernetes or blockchain or Jamstack, one of those three things has to be mentioned, or else it's not a conference. It gets canceled. But yeah, so Jim and I were sitting there in this conference hall in the Heinz Museum in Pittsburgh, playing guitars, and he's showing me how to play, like, I don't know, a bunch of stuff. He knew like every song ever written. And Corey Haynes was there, who a lot of people who've done Ruby know Corey Haynes, super awesome dude. And he's like, PJ, you're always here and you're always at conferences, but you never do a talk. And I was like, yeah, I have like half an idea kicking around. I was like, yeah, back to playing Secret Agent Man with Jim, because I feel like Corey's going to try and drag me into something here. And Corey's like, I'll be back in a minute. I thought he was going to go grab a couple more sodas. And he comes back in, he goes, dude, totally signed you up for a lightning talk. And I said, what?
Oh, no.
He goes, no, it's fine. You're going right after me. I'm like, what? And I mean, I know I'd been a musician. I'd been on stage pretty much my whole life, but, I had a nice drum set in front of me to keep me away from people seeing things that I was doing wrong. Because if you're not a drummer, only other drummers know when you do something wrong.
I see.
So it was kind of cheating. But so I was like, all right, I have half this idea. It's about how meetups are kind of like open source projects and you should treat them like such. I was like, I have no slides and I have 15 minutes to be ready for a 5-minute talk. So I did what anyone else would do, walked up on stage and faked it. Pretended like I made one slide just to hold something on the screen so they would pay attention to that and not be looking at me. I then gave a 3-minute quick dissertation on why these things should work. Walked off stage completely, no idea if there might have been 400 million people in the room or 0. I didn't know. I was like sweating profusely. Walked off stage, and this guy, Wes Garrison, walks up and he goes, that was really good. Would you like to do a full version of that at Ruby Midwest? And I looked at him right in the eye and I said, I don't know.
What did I even say?
I was like, I don't know if I'm allowed to do that. I really had no concept. Was this something that people did? I just thought that people sprung up naturally at conferences and knew how to talk. I just thought that was like a thing. So that rolled into speaking at Rails Israel, which rolled into Ruby Lyon. And suddenly I'm traveling the world talking about, open source and meetups and how people work together. Because I, done some studies on stuff like that. And I was like, oh, this works out. People are oddly interested to not hear the hardcore guts of a computer language. They're actually interested in hearing how people work. And that led to a conversation with a guy named Eamon Leonard, who was working at Engine Yard at the time. He had come in through a company called Orchestra that Engine Yard had purchased. And he's, from Ireland. And he called me up one day and he goes, hey, we work together. And I was like, yeah, I know. We went to orientation together, kind of. And he was like, yeah. So I see that you're speaking out in the community quite a little bit. I was like, yeah, it's like a new thing that I'm trying out. He's like, do you want to start a community team? And I was like, what the hell is that? And he goes, well, I have no idea. So let's figure it out. And we sat down, for an hour on a Zoom call and fleshed out what a DevRel team should be. And then we've literally been friends ever since. Like that experience, we started the team. There were 5 of us. We would write code. We would write blog posts. We would go to conferences and speak. We would find open source projects that needed help, whether that be financially or just, with code or just with a little bit of exposure, and we would help them out. We were all about the external community. And we also did a brief television show inside of Engine Yard, but that's neither here nor there. It was the most ridiculous thing. And through that, we bonded, we became really good friends. We ended up throwing 2 huge conferences called Distill in 2013, 2014. Okay. You can still find them at distill.engineyard.com.
That's what I was about to say.
Yeah, we decided that what the best way to give back to the community was to build the best conference possible. So we spent $250,000 twice to bring people. I think the first year was in Treasure Island in San Francisco, and the second year was at the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, and
which is a great
which absolutely amazing. But yeah, I mean, we had everything from Jim Wyrick and his flying AR drones to Jim Wyrick also playing ukulele, singing song. Dr. Nick, who some people might know, doing slide karaoke where he didn't know what was coming and doing a talk that involved Jay-Z and Madonna, but relating that to open source code. Michael Opp,
right.
Who did Brands in Repose. A lot of people know him as a speaker. And it was just kind of like, who find the best speakers we can and bring them in. Bring absolutely the best lineup we possibly could, and then make the ticket affordable, give away a bunch of stuff for free, no sponsor booths, no foolishness, just a really good tech conference. And that we managed to do that twice. It was really fun. Awesome. Then we parted ways. Things started to change a little bit at Engine Yard, so I left, took a job at another company, but kept kind of doing the DevRel role. And I've enjoyed it. And then I spent some time at one really large corporation. Doesn't matter who, but I realized that the whole time Eamon, who wasn't working at Engineer either, kept pushing me. He's an entrepreneurial type. He was like, "You should open your own company. You should do your own thing. PJ is a service. PJazz." And I was like, "That's not happening." Definitely, whatever happens, never naming a company PJazz. That just sounds ridiculous. So I took his advice and we talked a few things over. And I think it was April of 2017, I filed to get my own company, and that's how DevRelate was born. And it took months. It took a false start. I was looking at things, and I said to Eamon, I said, I'm 40. Was this 2017? So I was 42 years old, something like that. I have kids who are in high school. I live in America, which means I have to pay for health insurance. I was like, it's easy for you to say, you've had 3 successful startups, you've got money in the bank. I can't just do that. And he's like, no, just do it.
Right.
And so in April, I was like, all right, I'm not going to do it. And I was, my wife and I were speaking. She's like, you're going to regret that you didn't do this. This is going to be the biggest mistake you make if you don't at least try. She's like, we're fine. We can try. And Flora's also met my wife, so she knows how awesome my wife is. Flora basically, she came here and lived at my house without ever actually. She came to speak at a conference I was throwing simply so she could see yellow school buses. It was really cool. I can believe. But yeah, so I waited a few months, put a little money aside, told the company I was working for, a company called Logs.io, that I was going to go and do this, and I gathered up 3 clients. Michelada.io, which is a consultancy down in Mexico. Tito.io, who a lot of people probably know right now because they also have the Vito platform, which is awesome for streaming your events.
Very lovely.
And as I'm putting everything together, who walks through the door but my old boss, Sean from Engine Yard. And he says, hey, that thing you used to do for us, we need your help. So I'm like, that's what I said. I said, if I could get 3 clients, I can do this.
Yeah.
And that's how DevRelate was born. And it's just developer and community relations as a service. So everything a developer advocate does, writing blog posts, finding the right place to be, knowing what conferences are what, going on stage and actually speaking, wearing the t-shirt, negotiating with conference organizers and how to get better booth space, all that stuff, everything that involves being in the community, answering forums, everything. That's what DevRelate did. And for the first year and a half, almost 2 years, it was just me. So it was truly PJ as a service. What are you going to do? And then slowly we started to grow, and I began to get writers and people who focused on tutorials and people who focused on writing open source code and contributing to projects, working for the company. So I realized more and more I was focusing too much on the business side of things and not focusing on what I really loved, which was working with the community. Then this pandemic came. I don't know if everybody's aware there's a pandemic going on, but
you might have heard.
If you aren't, that's why those people are wearing masks. It's not just Halloween, folks.
You're somewhere where people wear masks?
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. But yeah, so I decided that it was time to go back to like maybe finding a full-time project, full-time job. And that's when Jason Blaze from Mattermost kind of popped up on my feed, and he was like, "Hey, if you're looking, if you're interested, why not give us a shot?" And I'd been using Mattermost because it's a really cool tool. My D&D group had been using it because, again, I'm probably the coolest guy most people are ever going to meet. I play.
We've hit online D&D before in the show. It's the reason I got into Discord. Yeah,
exactly. It's the number of people who know more communication tools other than Slack because of D&D is shockingly high.
Yeah.
Shockingly high.
Yeah.
But yeah, so sure. I started there about a month ago, and I'm really liking the team. It's a lot of fun. But it's a great community, and that's really where kind of everything came together for me. It's like I love working with huge communities. I love having the ability to talk to people about technical issues, and I love just seeing people that are passionate about stuff.
Yeah.
I get that sometimes it's your job, so you're not always like, oh man, I would love to talk about modals all day. That would be great. Let's talk about serverless till the end of time. No, there's people. Some people want to talk about like, hey, you remember that album by that band several years ago? And they love that. You go to a conference and you're like, Pearl Jam 10 really changed my life. It's like, that's really cool. Let's talk about that and not servers for 10 minutes. And you realize like that's how you create a community. It's all about
for sure. Human. Yeah, like communities are more than just the topic you're gathered around.
Exactly.
And I guess you must see a lot of that as like, I imagine working at Mattermost, like you're not just working on the Mattermost community, but like the Mattermost community is made up of people who are running Mattermost, I imagine. So it's a community of people who have their own communities. So I imagine you hear a lot of these problems come through.
Right. And I mean, and it's interesting because one of the things I think that made Mattermost's communities makes it so interesting is the fact that it is a community of communities. It's a chat app tool for chat apps. Like it's so meta, Joe. It's so meta. Everything's so meta at Mattermost. They should have called it MetaMost. I'm going to mention that at the next meeting. But
that was physically painful.
I am a dad. I'm required by law in the United States to make these jokes.
Yeah.
But like in all seriousness, like it is interesting to see how these communities learn to make their communities better by what's going on with other communities. And Mattermost keeps that all open and flowing, and it's really, really cool.
Awesome. Rad. So one thing that we briefly spoke about before the show that I'd love to get into is like we've had a couple people on the show like Wilhelm, who has started his own independent like business and is like currently in the midst of that, and we've spoken with other people about like leaving tech jobs, moving on to the next thing, and like you're kind of in the intersection of this where you started your own thing and have decided to move on from it, and that's obviously a very different thing than moving on from just like some other job, right? Like this is your baby that you grew and now you're leaving it in the hands of other people who I'm sure you trust and are very happy to work with them. But what was that process like?
It was tough. I mean, it was super difficult because first you have to come to the realization that it's not exactly your baby anymore.
Right.
And I mean, like this is where that whole parenting metaphor, this is where that metaphor dies.
Full circle, right?
Yeah, it's like, you had this thing and you created this thing, but you've given this thing to the world. And this is, I think part of it, goes back to my time as a musician is, you go into a studio and you create an album. Great. You write the songs together. You have a very particular connection to them. For anyone who's ever recorded music in a studio with a band before, you get sick of them. A lot of times because it's like, you have to play a song 800 times to get it right the way you want it on the album. Then you have to listen to it another 800 times to make sure you didn't miss one note in the third measure of the fourth stanza. It's a pain. It's very difficult. But you understand that once that process is done, once you've loved that thing to death, it goes out into the world and it's no longer yours. That's how music works. There's going to be critics that talk about what they think this is about. There's going to be fans who it means something different to them because it's hitting them at a certain point in their life. And I realized that's kind of what this business was about. Like I had an idea when I first started, this is what I was going to do. What DevRelate does now is nothing like that vision. And this is the hardest part. That's okay. I think the problem that a lot of people have when they start a business is they think that their vision is the only vision. It has to stay on that. A good example, I worked at a company between working at Engineer and working for the big corporation. I worked at a company for a month. They had something like 27 million in venture capital sitting in the bank, but the founder decided it didn't meet his vision, and one day he just shut it down while I was in Dublin for Web Summit. He just walked in on a Monday morning and told everyone, here's some boxes and bags, go home.
Wow.
That's not the right way to do things, by the way.
It
does not instill a lot of confidence in you as a leader. Or it's not really good for people who are not in America when they live in America.
Right.
But beyond my own panic situation, like as I watched DevRelate kind of evolve and my role in DevRelate evolve at the same time, I realized that there's going to be a point where it's okay for me to step aside. And that's absolutely, that's okay. Like it's the hardest thing to it took me probably 3 months to convince myself that was okay. And luckily, I mean, especially in this time of pandemic, I have my wife who's also at home all the time because there's a pandemic, and has to listen to me because we have a very small house.
Right.
But she was like, if you feel like, you're not doing what you want to do, then go do the thing that you want to do. DevRelate will be here. Like it's kind of nice too, because I have a safety net. If things don't work out, I can always go back. Plus, as the founder, you continue to kind of make money off the thing. But
that's always a nice upside.
Pretty nice piece of information there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like the great thing about doing it is it's freeing. And like now that I've stepped away and I've been away, I'm working at Mattermost now, I can look back on DevRelate, like watch what's going on and check in with people. And it's like, hey, look at that cool thing. Now that I'm separate, like it's its own thing, and I really appreciate it more. Like I'm not so close to it. Like, yeah, I can see some of the flaws. I can see some of the potholes and some of the mistakes that were made. And I can make suggestions on fixing it, but I'm not tied into it. Like I'm not like so close to it that it's no fun.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the key.
I imagine it gives you a new perspective on many different things. If you ever did end up back there, you would have a wealth of new ideas and renewed energy in it, I guess, would be.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Uncle Traveling Matt from the Fraggles, if you remember the Fraggles. Like he went out into the world, and then he'd send stuff back to the Fraggles, and the Fraggles would be like, oh yeah, we can improve our lives because he went out and learned some things in the world, and that's totally rad. And that's kind of, that's kind of the perspective that I'd say. That metaphor oddly just popped into my head. I had not thought about that before. Anyone who thinks that was contrived, that was for real. But yeah, like
I'm frantically googling the Fraggles, if I'm honest.
Yeah, this is where my age comes in.
Fraggle Rock. Okay,
yeah, Fraggle Rock. Okay. Down at Fraggle Rock. I hope that there are people.
Oh, that's being clipped. Let me quickly mark that on the stream. So I guess this to me seems like a very good time to transition into open sourcing mental illness, which is a project that you suggested we chat about today. And I looked up and was immediately very excited. I think this is a very important topic. So do you want to tell us a little bit about this project and I guess like where it's coming from?
Yeah. So, and it kind of goes into the last story too. So I mentioned that, we were doing community work, Eamon Leonard and I at Engine Yard. And in 2013, we were like, we need like a cause. We need something that's important. Like what is something that we think we can help with in tech? And we're like, well, there's two huge issues. There is mental health, and there is diversity and inclusion. It's like we've been allies for diversity and inclusion. We push to get people who don't look like us, bearded white dudes on stage all the time. So, we're also, paying for diversity programs. We're doing what we can.
Right.
Let's look at mental health. And part of that is we were looking at some statistics that a friend of ours, Ed Finkler, had kind of collected. And the number of people who were depressed or having issues in tech and were literally suicidal was ridiculously high compared to other industries.
Yeah,
we found that part of the reason for that is in tech we tend to think of our equipment as being important, like our laptops are important, our keyboards, mechanical or otherwise, these are our tools, but if they break, we have no problem hopping on Amazon and replacing them.
Right.
When really our main tool is our brains, and no one ever wants to admit that that's not working. And so it's kind of interesting. So at the time, Ed started doing a talk that was literally called Open Sourcing Mental Illness, and he would share with people his journey of realizing that he has some issues. He deals with depression, he deals with anxiety, social anxiety. And these things went all the way back to his childhood, he found through a therapist. And he would just very rawly tell you his story, which Eamon and I were blown away. This was super powerful.
Yeah.
So we originally created an organization called mhprompt.org under Engine Yard, and we would pay for these speakers to go to tech conferences and just speak about their experience. Because we felt that the only way to kind of end the stigma of mental health in tech was to make sure that we had a mental health and tech speaker at every conference we could possibly go to, covering everything from imposter syndrome to ADHD, to anxiety, bipolar disorder, different therapies, to, just general burnout and mental health and safety. And so we did that. We would pay for them to fly. We'd pay for their hotels, make sure they were taken care of. We had sponsorship from Engine Yard and from Travis CI for a while, or I'm sure we had the Travis Foundation really. And then eventually Engine Yard kind of went by the wayside and ran out of money. And Travis was bought out and decided they didn't want to do the foundation anymore. So during that time, Ed, who is a prompt speaker, had been developing OSMI. And we'd always worked in concert with each other. So he was doing surveys and documents and putting out publications and blog posts to share all the stories that were so important to everything that was going on out in the world. And so we were like, great, we're doing this. Then Prompt finally we ran out of money. And I went to Ed and I said, we've kicked around this idea for a long time. Maybe it's time for Prompt to bring all the prompt speakers into OSMI. He had everything super. It was a 501(c) charitable organization you could donate to tax-free, and all this great stuff. And I was trying to manage a bank account that was in Germany because that's where Travis had established it, and I had no idea what I was doing. All while also running my own business and trying to do a regular job. So we brought everything together, and I became a board member at OSMI a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago. And they dedicate themselves to just making sure the community is educated about mental health and specifically how it affects people in tech. And I love the fact it's called Open Sourcing Mental Illness because that's really how it works. If you want to participate, your level of participation is determined by your desire to participate. Some people will jump on and ask for some resources because they'd like to do a talk at their local meetup. Some people will just donate $10 a month, which you can actually do through Amazon Smile. OSMI is part of the Amazon Smile program. So if you know about Amazon Smile, Amazon gives a donation every time you purchase something, and it costs you nothing.
Cool.
Which is pretty rad. But yeah, I mean, my job at OSMI is to kind of continue to coordinate speakers. So, you want someone, you're doing a DevOps Days Amsterdam, and you want someone to come and speak about, how anxiety affects people who are in the SRE space. We've got someone who can help you. For those of you who went to KubeCon EU or KubeCon in the US in San Diego last year, there's an OSMI booth handing out a mental health at conferences pamphlet that I helped write with my friend Beth. And, it covered everything from why it's important to wash your hands. And we did not know how important it was to wash your hands back then. But taking care of your physical health because that affects your mental health, to, pointing out that it's okay to leave a conference in the middle of the day to go take a nap because you are exhausted from people.
Which is a big part of my conference routine.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have to, the expectation, you are not expected to be in meetings for 10 hours a day and then go out with the entire team afterwards at work. You should not expect yourself to be able to do that at a conference. There are some people who can. There's some people who thrive off of that. I'm one of those people, and I get it that I am outside the bell curve. I totally understand that. I'm on one extreme end. I think the key is making sure that you're healthy and you do what you need to do, and that's really what OSMI's main mission is we understand that people have mental health issues to varying degrees, and people want to admit to those to varying degrees. But we want to end that stigma. We want people to be able to talk about things. And the response we've seen between Prompt and OSMI is astounding. I remember one of the first talks we did was Greg Bogus gave a talk at the same Steel City Ruby that I gave my first lightning talk at. Granted, he gave it before I knew I was going to do that, so I was pretty chill. But he came on stage and, he gave this talk about his personal issues, which include ADHD and bipolar disorder. And he talked about everything, the medicine that he used and the anxiety that the medicine caused, because one of the side effects was, started with a painful itch in the rear end and ended with death. So he's like, anytime my bum itched, I was worried that, this was a sign, but he's okay. But, he gave this great talk, and at one point he said, the thing that we need to remember is, you should go see a therapist because, Michael Jordan had a coach, Tiger Woods has a coach. Don't think that that's anything other, different or special. Go get a coach, go get someone to talk to. And I looked around the room and people were crying. And it was just this amazing visceral reaction. People were suddenly coming to the realization, like, I might have an issue. I probably should go see someone. And especially right now, you're captive, you're home. You don't get to interact with people, and like, this is great, Joe, but I would love to meet you in real life and hang out on a canal and have a beer
for sure,
and chill out. We can't do that right now. So people are having an even bigger issue right now with this, like, what they call COVID captivity, mental health issue,
and the upending of life. And like right now we're at like 6 months where, like, for example, if you don't live immediately next to your family, you probably haven't seen them, and all these kind of factors.
All these people they've had babies and their parents haven't seen their grandchildren. It's like crazy. And that's part of what OSMI, all we're saying is, like, go talk to somebody. There's some resources there on the page to go find people to talk to. And right now, like, I thoroughly believe, if you've never seen a therapist before in your life and you've never thought you had to, go find one of these online therapy things where you can just, like, book a 30-minute session. It's not probably going to put you out very much financially. It's probably affordable. And if you have insurance, it's probably paid for. If you're in the US, and if you're not in the US, there's still other services. You can totally do this. And just talk to a therapist for a half hour, see how you feel afterwards. It's shocking how much you're willing to tell a complete stranger that you don't even realize you yourself are feeling. Right.
Fascinating. Well, that's awesome. It's so, for folks who, is there a particular, like, OSMI or Prompt resource? Like, you mentioned that pamphlet. Is there anything like that online for people who are wondering if this applies to them and want to kind of, like, see it written on the page, for, like, a good place for them to start?
Yeah, if you go to osmihelp.org, that's a good start.
Cool.
And I think that let me actually.
There's a bunch of talks on here as well.
Yeah, watch the talks. See how you feel about that. Take a look at the videos. Ed has some great videos up there. He also has a really great to listen to voice in general. But if you head over
radio to voices,
exactly. If you head over to the resources side, like, there's guidelines for mental health awareness in the workplace, guidelines for executives and HR professionals. Like, there's these great pamphlets and things, and you can also join the forums and just talk.
Which, by the way, these mental health and tech guidelines books, if you haven't seen them, they're on LeanPub, so you can pay for them, and I guess that's a form of donating. But you can also, on LeanPub, you can also pay nothing. So if you're in a situation where you're like, I don't know if this is for me, or I can't afford this right now, but this is something I think may be applicable to me, you can totally get hold of the resources, and if you are so inclined, you're able to donate later.
And there's great resources there. Take a look at them for yourself, but also, like, keep an eye on your friends, keep an eye on your fellow developers. We can only make things better if we're all paying attention to each other. There's a mental health first aid resource on the resources page. I don't know if they're doing remote classes, but it's not. And to be clear, I'm not a mental health professional. Full disclosure, not a doctor. I simply play one on TV. But, like, in all seriousness, like, it's about learning how to recognize these things first in yourself and then in others. Literally, and I hate to, it sounds so, like, ridiculously dramatic, but it's true. I feel like we're saving lives. And that's really what's important. I would much rather have you around.
There was a mental health first aid course on Coursera, I want to say. Yeah, it's how you say it. It's like, it's first aid is an adequate description of it. It's like, you're not claiming to be a therapist or anything, but like it gives you the tools to. Everyone has been one of those conversations where, well, maybe not everyone, but if you've been one of those conversations where you've had a conversation with a friend and you suddenly get hit with like, oh, I am suddenly very worried about their well-being, and like what I say next could be very important. It's for those conversations where you're like, okay, how do I navigate for the situation and help them, like, and make sure they are safe and that we're able to get them to a place where they can get help from someone who maybe is a doctor, but like that immediate, you are the person on the ground at that time that crisis is happening and you have to do something. It's what
exactly
for. Yeah,
exactly.
So cool, Sarah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's not just a passion project for me. I think it's just a super important thing that we take care of each other, because it's, you know, I think a lot of companies, and this is something that a lot of the folks who are involved say, a lot of companies say things like, you know, we're here to make the world a better place. That's cool. I've never touched a web application or mobile application that made me say, this made my world a better place. But there's people that I've talked with that have definitely made my world a better place. Yeah. And I want those people to be around. And if that means, you know, they go through a rough time, but a little bit of help gets them to stick around, then cool. Yeah. Let's help each other out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Cool. Well, I think that brings us just about to time and a good place to wrap up. So that's been, I hope, a super useful resource, particularly as we've been talking a lot this Hacktoberfest about, you know, not just, hey, Hacktoberfest celebration of open source and a great time to get into it, but also there's a lot of maintainers who have a lot of work right now, and that's kind of reflective of the overall industry, and a lot of maintainers are unpaid. So it's an additional why I was very excited to cover this resource as people get towards, you know, that time of the year where everyone gets a little bit burnt out. So yeah, cool. Thank you so much, PJ. It's been super useful. If people want to find you on the internet, where should they go?
The easiest place is on Twitter. I am at Asplenic, ASPLEENIC.
Spelled this right?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. Which is funny because it's actually, I found out it's a misspelling. It should only have one E in it. But really? It's been my username since World War II BBSs, World War III BBSs, World War IV boards as well. But playing Global Domination, so this will be a fun capstone. So a lot of people know this story, but some people don't. Yeah. When I was 19, I lost my spleen in a bicycle accident.
Okay.
I was trying to get to work. I was riding my bicycle down the street in Buffalo. A car tried to cut me off. I, to avoid that car, shifted a little bit to the right, which then meant hitting the side view mirror of a parked car, engaging the brake, stopping the bike. But for those of you who are familiar with physics, I did not stop. Ran my abdomen into the handlebars of the bicycle, rupturing my spleen, tearing my pancreas, dislocating my shoulder. Since then, so like, I don't think people realize how often they make spleen jokes. Right. Like, I had a rough day. I just need to vent my spleen, or, you know, like, watch
TV. I've never heard these phrases, but God, I can imagine.
Now that you know,
I see it everywhere. Yeah.
But yeah, like, so they removed my spleen. I was in the hospital. I'm okay now. But like, when it came to like picking a username, I was like, oh, like, my literal thing is I'm a splenic. I don't have a spleen, which, you know, a splenic. So I started using it, and it has been my username on everything since then. Which in some ways is like,
that's like so widely available that no one else without a spleen thought to go by that.
I've never had it, like Xbox Live, GitHub, everywhere. Like, it's always been available to me.
There's some like researcher in spleens who's deeply annoyed at you stealing that username everywhere.
And maybe it's because I added the extra E. The actual term is a splenic. Right. But I feel like that sounds dumb, so I'm just going to add an E. No, I mean, literally, I made a mistake the first time I typed it, and it stuck.
So that's how good usernames are born.
Exactly. Everybody needs a good username story at some point in time.
Yeah, for sure. Mine is unfortunately just my name, so it's very boring. But we're good. Cool. Thank you so much. Again, I'll put that back on the screen. Folks who want to find PJ, you can find him at the Splenic, which now we know where that's come from.
Exactly.
And thank you so much for your time on the show. I will now do the very inelegant kicking you backstage to do the outro thing now. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's been a joy.
Catch you later. Thank you. Bye. Awesome. So again, thank you, PJ. That was wonderful. as I said, like, we are really trying on the show to highlight different ways and paths through tech careers. So hearing PJ, another career change story from an arts-ish topic. We also had Layla on last week, who had a very similar background, kind of moving into tech, and then hearing again from there the transition into DevRel. I hope that's useful for y'all. It's definitely useful for me. And then hearing about open source mental illness, as we kind of touched on why we think that's important, and especially like in these incredibly unusual times, but otherwise aside, I know these are conversations I have been fortunate enough to have with many kind of current and former coworkers in the workplace, when you kind of get to that point and realize that, hey, you have shared questions or problems about your work that you are able to speak to someone in. But if you are not in that position and you are looking for a place to get help, that resource that PJ shared, I hope can get you to that spot. So we have 2 more shows for today. Next up, in about 2.5 hours, is Shai Ruparel from Contentful. We are going to be doing the old code review game with Shai. So we're going to be looking at an old Flask app of Shai's. And then the last show of the day is with Frida, who's a Raised.Dev alum, and we're going to be doing Issue Safari around Ruby for Good. So we spoke a little bit about projects for good in this show. We're going to look at some more projects for good and how you can contribute to them in the last show of the day. You can find our full schedule at twitch.tv RaisedDev schedule. And if you haven't already and you want to get notifications when we go live, you can follow us here on Twitch. You can hit the love heart, then hit the bell. That will give you notifications, or you can find us at RaisedDevs on Twitter. And also, thanks to Sushi Day, we're now on belly.io. Belly.io is a lovely site where you can find either cooking shows or programming shows. And we're now there. That's the wrong chat. I put that in. We are now there. So you'll be able to find us whenever we go live on belly.io as well. So last thing from me before I hop off and go get some lunch. Raise.Dev is a service here to help you get the support you need in leveling up your career. We heard PJ talk there a little bit about, hey, professional people in sports, they have coaches. Why shouldn't developers? So we will match you with a developer who help you get the experience that you need to level up your career, get to the next place you want to be, whether it's a new job, a first job, a promotion, whatever it is, we will help you get there. And you can sign up completely for free today at raise.dev. So that's everything from me. I hope to see you in a couple of hours. If I don't see you then, I hope to see you some point in one of our future shows. Again, we'll update the schedule over the weekend for next week's shows. But enjoy the rest of your days. Have a wonderful weekend if I don't see you for the rest of the day. And farewell. Thank you for watching.